Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh and I'm with you for the next, probably 60 odd minutes. Anyway, as you know, we love a special guest. It's true. This week it's going to be the turn of the Folk Devils because I spoke to one of the members very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry, plus much, much more. Yes, it's going to be Kris Jozajtis. I probably mispronounced that slightly. But anyway, I did my best, and that's Kris with a K, by the way. So, yes, after several minutes of casual chat, as you do in the world that is showbiz, we got down to the very exciting subject about the early formative years. And I'd mentioned that, yes, the early 70s, I was very excited. My formative period of glam rock, and people like Gary Glitter. And from that, Kris responded. Kris, it's over to you. You get the gist. We're going to chat for quite some time. But don't worry, it's quality chat. Kris is amazing. Anyway, oh yes, and also the band have got a new EP out, which you'll also hear about, titled Forever. So, sit back, relax, enjoy.
Who shall not be mentioned ever again, despite being a massive star and everybody having his records. But
yes,
I have to confess, I think I saw Gary Glitter at least once live.
Yeah,
but it was a night I saw one of the greatest ever shows I'd ever seen by the Cramps at King's College in London. But I'll give you a bit of background. I grew up, moved around quite a lot when I was growing up, but my parents loved music, and I had a steady diet of the Beatles and Frank Sinatra and all sorts, quite a sort of eclectic background of music growing up. And then early 70s, just as the kind of hormones start to hit, and, you know, being into music started to become a thing at secondary school. David Bowie happened. And I can remember distinctly that very famous appearance of his on Top of the Pops, on the which used to be on a Thursday back then. And the next day, everybody was talking about David Bowie. Sort of Bowie, glam rock, all that kind of stuff. And then I really got into The Who. You can probably hear bits of that in some of the Folk Devil stuff. And then, as luck had it, in 1976, I'd met up with some sort of kindred spirits, and we were trying to form a kind of a band influenced by The Who and the Kinks and the 60s American punk bands, which was probably quite hip, I suppose, but that's the kind of stuff we were into. Just at the same time, unbeknownst to us, there was, bands like the Pistols and the Clash and stuff forming in London, and I lived in a place called High Wycombe. I don't know if you know it, but it's about 30 miles outside of London, between London and Oxford, but it had a pub called the Nag's Head, which was on the pub rock circuit, and it was promoted by a guy called Ron Watts on a Thursday night. And I'd started to go and see bands in early 1976 there, and then the last band before he took a summer break was Eddie and the Hot Rods in like June or July of 1976. And the first band after the break was the Sex Pistols. And that was genuinely a kind of life-changing evening. I sort of knew what I was letting myself in for, but obviously hadn't really seen or heard them before that. And and I was just really, really lucky that within walking distance of my house was a pub that put on all the top first-generation punk bands like the Clash, the Damned. I think they did the first headlining gig at the Nag's Head. So I saw all that, and that was my real musical education. So I'm a, I don't listen to a huge amount of punk rock anymore, but I mean, it was a really, really big deal. And then that led on to loads of other sort of stuff out of that.
That was,
that was, if you like, the roots are there. I'm basically an old punk.
Yes. And when did you think When did the guitar appear in your life?
I think that was probably, I seem to recall there was a pal of mine who had a copy of Ziggy Stardust, and of course, back in sort of like early 70s, uh, owning an album was a big deal. I mean, you know, you bought them one at a time, and it took weeks to save up for one when you were still at school. And I went round his house, and he had a Woolworths electric guitar and a little amplifier and stuff like that. And I thought, well, let's give that a go. And there was a guitar I think my dad had tried to play, so I started playing on that. So I don't know, probably about 13 or 14, started to pick up some sort of rudimentary chords, and then sort of, it would have been probably about 75, first time playing with other people. So sort of mid-teens, and then started playing a band. And the first gig I did was in 1976, and I don't know how much of a story, but this is sort of, we were High Wycombe's first punk band called Death Wish, and we did a gig in a place called the Liston Hall in Marlow, which is down on the Thames, quite sort of stockbroker belt-ish. We supported a hippie band, but we went full-on punk, and I just came on, insulted the audience, and it was virtually right. They had to get the police in at the end. That was my first ever gig, and I think I was lost thereafter, because it was such an exciting, bonkers thing to be doing. We weren't very good, no doubt, but I mean, we gigged fairly regularly, and because, again, the High Wycombe connection, and Ron Watts, the promoter, he gave the local bands a chance to play, supporting bands like Generation X, XTC, pretty decent bands, and actually even to the stage of the town. Also, you kind of got a bit of experience under your belt really, really quickly, playing with, to a crowds and the rest of it. And we did okay, and that was really, from then it was sort of, like eventually thinking I need to move into London if I want to take that further.
Yes, well, that's quite an amazing sort of early education. I don't think many people have ever had that kind of experience.
No, I did expect the rest of my life to be really that exciting, what it was. I mean, I turned 18 in September 76, if that gives you a timeline. I mean, that was the perfect time, in terms of punk, if that was your kind of thing, loud guitars and shouting, basically, if that was your thing, it was like the perfect time to turn 18.
So then what happened after that until, the folk devils, sort of became...
It was a bit of hanging about. I mean, there was a few bands until I moved into London, which would have been about early 80s, and living in squats with other people, and there were loose connections with the likes of Killing Joke. I was very pally with I don't know if you know Red Beat. They were sort of, again, they had close connections with Killing Joke, and them, and sort of there was a whole kind of it wouldn't be low rent. It was a squat scene really in West London, through which I met Ian Lowery. Through that, and there was an occasion where one of our kind of circle, there's various kind of attempts to get bands going, that some were slightly better than others, but nothing really. And Ian was kind of doing pretty well. He'd had Ski Patrol in particular, and there was a pal of ours called Alex who wanted to record a demo. He was working, he was a street cleaner, but it meant he actually had a proper wage. And he booked a studio somewhere in South London. And he got Mark, the bass player from the Folk Devils, who must have been about 16 or 17, ridiculously young at the time. This would have been maybe about 80, 82, 83 maybe. And Ian heard the recording that we made, and it was pretty basic stuff, but I came up with a really kind of pretty cool Stooges-ish kind of riff, and Ian latched on to that, and we kind of knew each other by then anyway. And I think his band, I think there was maybe a band called F the Fake or something that had Ski Patrol had broken up, and we got chatting backstage at a gig by Brilliant, which was the band that Youth formed after he left Killing Joke. They're two bass players, and they were kind of bubbling under, didn't quite make it, but they were playing a pretty decent gig, I think, at the Ace Cinema in Brixton. We were kind of ligging backstage, and Ian just sold me on the idea of a band that he said, "Do you want to join? You know, I'm forming a band. It's going to be a combination of country blues and German metal bashing." And that combination, I thought, how could it fail? So it was that kind of, and Ian was, you know, fairly charming guy as well. So we kind of agreed to do something, and he got Al, who was in Ski Patrol, and then Mark, who was around, and I was living in a squat in Stockwell, and there was a room downstairs that it was set up as a wee rehearsal studio. I mean, these days, you know, kind of free property in London doesn't really come along, but there's a different times. And if you were young and free and single, you know, it was pretty. And we started playing, and it was kind of, yeah, this will work. And immediately kind of fired it up, and yeah, I guess Ian would have led it, and you know, he was the kind of real kind of main impetus between for the material. He had a particular vision, as he kind of always did. He was a real kind of artist.
Yes. Did you sort of feel when the four of you got together? Did you feel that there was quite a lot of potential between you? Because obviously there must be thousands of bands that just go, oh, nothing happens. But then the ones that do, there must be that moment where you think, God, this is kind of, we've got something a bit better than the previous band, or one of those bands who just kind of like, well, that's it, guys, don't worry about it.
I think pretty much at the first rehearsal, I mean, we got two fully formed songs, I think, and a few other kind of bits and pieces. But Hank Turns Blue we played at that very first rehearsal. And Ink Runs Dry, which is actually, we finally recorded properly for this new EP that's coming out, and maybe a couple of other things. But those two in particular, we were thinking, yeah, this is pretty good. And I think there was an element, Al, the drummer, had already played with Ian. He was he had plenty of fire in his belly, but he was a pretty decent drummer as well. Mark was great. He was a bit of a child prodigy, really. Mark, really good, solid bass player. I added the noise element, and Ian had a very clear idea of what he wanted to do, and we all liked what we come up with straight away. So it just became we just kind of took it from there and committed to it pretty quickly.
Because the early 80s, I mean, at that point, Thatcher had been in from 1979, and there was a lot of unemployment, and there was a lot of people signing on, and there was the job seekers allowance and enterprise allowance scheme. People loved that, didn't they? And
I chose to sign on.
The sign-on deal, which was, because at the time there wasn't really it wasn't a bad status, was it? I mean, looking back at it, people don't realise, but sort of going unemployed for a year or so was almost like just the thing people did if you were sort of slightly left of centre and you felt a bit like part
well,
of
I mean, there were 82, was it, about 3 million unemployed, and actually compared to now, the regime of the DHSS as it was back then, it was pretty reasonable. I mean, it was still the kind of post-war welfare settlement, really. And if you were out of work, it wasn't seen as being your fault or that you were a lazy shite. You kind of genuinely got support. And I think all of us in the Folk Devils probably regarded the system as a bit rigged anyway. And if people were allowed a grant, because of course students got full grants back then, to go and study, whatever, engineering or philosophy or whatever they wanted to do, I felt quite entitled just to take a grant in the form of my dole check and use it to develop my musical talents and career, such as they were. And that was pretty much, ironically, it was actually an advantage working if you lived in a squat, because you didn't have to spend any of your earnings on
accommodation,
on rent.
Yes.
Whereas you would if you were. It's a time that seems so far away now because of how loose everything was compared to how, if you like, over regulated perhaps because of the easy access people have to information and data. It was easy to live on the margins then. You signed on every 2 weeks, you got some money and you got by. And when you're young, that's it, and you've got no responsibilities in the form of children or anything like that. It was quite a liberating time.
Yeah.
And I guess at the time we were a little bit at odds really with everything else that was going on, because we definitely tapped into, we hadn't quite given up on the, if you like, the rock element of the punk scene, if you like. The post-punk scene, a lot of it started, I remember the terms being, rockist became a term of insult and stuff like that. And actually, I think whether an element of irony or is because we were by instinct a rock and roll band, we kept that, but we had Ian adding this kind of very acerbic kind of edge to the lyrical content and the whole attitude he wanted to project. But we also harked back to, I don't know, the Stooges and things like that. They talk about the punk scene, but I wasn't introduced to things, particularly the MC5 had a big impact on me before punk came along. We just kind of picked up a record out of curiosity once.
Yeah,
bought it.
because there was the punk period, which was very short before it all gets a bit rubbish, and then you had post-punk, and obviously you had the mainstream charts, which were like just there on top of the pops with big hair, big shoulder pads, and all that. But then you had those kind of the early indie bands like Echo and the Bunnymen and Simple Minds and U2, and in '83 the Smiths appeared. And there was definitely a feeling from 83 to 87, which is the years of the Smiths, where indie pop was definitely something. You had all the other bits and pieces as well going on. And then, ecstasy hits, and then the dance scene happens, and then grunge happens, and then, it's a bit simplistic, okay? But
yeah. No, I'll tell you.
But,
yeah, we were definitely at odds with, if you like, the indie, the jangle element that really, I think the Smiths were the kind of the uber.
They were the ones.
They were the ones. And I still think that my favourite comparison to the Folk Devils was I think it was in Zigzag magazine back while we were still active, and described as like the Smiths on acid. And I thought that's probably quite a good thing, because Ian liked his words. The words were important. It wasn't just noise. We were trying to put across songs and ideas, but we wanted the guitars to be more, if you like, rock and roll, really. Like I mentioned earlier, the bands that really had an influence as I was learning how to play guitar, The Who, Small Faces, Dr. Feelgood, and then the early punk bands. That was really kind of what I aspired to play like. And then Mark was a massive fan of the Stranglers, and you can hear that sort of sound in what he does, that almost like a bass guitar as a lead guitar. So we were all, the whole idea was almost like a three-man front line, an assault almost on the audience.
Because the other thing about that period, which we slightly forget, and then you remember and think, oh yes, you had those gatekeepers, like there was, obviously the mainstream was the mainstream, but then you had, John Peel, you had the NME Melody Maker Sounds Record Mirror, and every town and city, and London obviously, had lots of little venues. Everyone had an alternative night, didn't they? Norwich had one, Bristol, Leeds, Glasgow, Manchester, all had those kind of nights where, you could, you got out of just playing in front of your friends and family and anybody you could emotionally blackmail to see you, and actually go and go up the motorway in a van, play in front of strangers and go, blimey, we just got, a new audience of like 150, 200 people. And obviously, you quite, and you progress because you got, 3 John Peel sessions in quite quick succession in your early years, which must, you want to feel like you're progressing. Otherwise you think, what's the point of this? We're not playing live. We're not really getting heard beyond our little community. So that must have felt like a really big blessing from such an iconic figure.
Well, I think the Peel connection in particular, when he picked up on Hank Turns Blue, and I think I'm right in saying he played it every night for his show, which was I think 4 nights a week. Every night for 2 weeks. I mean, he really went for it, and it kind of put us on the map, and we got in the indie charts and stuff, which was worthless really in terms of sales, any serious sales. But it actually meant we'd sold a few. We had to repress the record and all that kind of stuff. And it gave us an opportunity to do exactly what you just described, which was head up the motorway to Leeds, or York was one of the first places we went to play. I better not mention Blackpool because I never had a good time at Blackpool. I'm not sure we ever got paid in Blackpool, although we played it a couple of times. But that kind of adventure, and heading out and playing, alongside other bands. And there was that period of 84, 85 where there were lots of miners' benefits and that kind of stuff.
Miners' benefits, yes. Red Wedge.
Don't think we ever did a Red Wedge thing, but again, it was very much of that sort of that period. We certainly did a few miners' benefits. I'm pretty sure we did one with a very early incarnation of Pulp, because they were operating way back when.
Yes, I know. That's the weird one.
But some archivist somewhere has probably got a note of it. So, yeah, I mean, that was the kind of Peel gave us the platform to go and do that, and then there was, if you like, there was a sufficiently kind of driven scene that pressing up 2,000 or 3,000 copies of a record seemed like a reasonable thing to do, and that's kind of, so we continued recording. We got the opportunity to play abroad in Germany and Holland quite a few times, and again playing actually much more prestigious venues and with bigger bands and stuff. So there was the opportunity there. So there was a sense of progress, and we felt musically we kept on kind of, if you like, developing.
Yeah.
But there was a point where it got a bit frustrating because everybody gets a bit older, and you just get a bit tired of waking up on a mattress on a floor somewhere, and the tensions start creeping in, and if you don't get that sense that there's something coming, and we didn't help ourselves. We weren't particularly good at doing the networking thing. We were our own worst enemies, and there was a period when I think quite a few people expected us to kick on to the next level, but we never really did. And part of that was really kind of the our own weaknesses, really, shall we say?
Yeah, because the few punk bands I've done from New York, really, there was definitely in the late 70s there was a huge problem with drugs in New York, not going good. And so I mean, the 80s, because my memory, which is people sort of drunk a lot, they smoked a bit, and it seemed to be kind of drinking was big. But quite a few members of the band got quite heavily into the drug scene, at quite an early age, which is like, and I know Lemmy from Motorhead really hates him. Though he took lots of drugs, it was mostly speed, let's face it. But yes, anything heavy was one of his kind of real taboos. Whereas, members of the Folk Devils did get slightly carried away, didn't they?
Yeah, well, it was without wishing to get into to details, I think a few of us maybe feel that some of it, some of us were quite lucky to survive that period. Of course, sadly, Ian didn't really make it into his dotage because he died of a drugs overdose in 2001. But that was, if you like, that was post that period. That's what I think surprised and shocked us all. That he didn't kind of, that he got caught out. The sucker punch, the hidden arm, if you like. But yeah, London was awash with substances. Especially if you were living, if you like, on the fringes of respectable society in squats and stuff like that. And there was, it's, I guess, quite a hedonistic time without sort of, I don't know, almost as a reaction. I think for a lot of people, they're looking for ways to make life a little bit more bearable, perhaps, for themselves. But I mean, whatever the reasons, I'm loath to kind of explain why people do certain things too much. If the stuff is out there, people are going to partake of it, and I definitely think it started becoming a problem, not just for the band, but people that we hung out with. So you've got this kind of rather darkening mood around the places that you hang out in during the 80s. And yeah, I think to some extent we tapped into it. I think part of that was the content, particularly of Ian's kind of lyrical observations, were informed by that kind of quite bleak mood. Whereas, I suppose that was the mid-80s and the moving into the late 80s. That's when you saw the kind of the financial sector in London explode, and yuppies and all that kind of stuff. We came out of a rather different kind of world and worldview.
Yes.
I think, to that.
Well,
I stayed in London after that, but I never felt particularly kind of. It was almost like there were two Londons, and there's probably. I live in Scotland now, so even when I go to London now, I'm sure there's very different Londons out there to the ones where people live in very expensive high-rise apartment blocks close to the centre, and then there's everybody else scrabbling about trying to get by.
Yes, it must be.
I'm not sure things have changed that much. I think it's just the nature, the detail has changed.
Yes, because one thing I noticed with most bands, they have this kind of 5-year narrative. The classic 5 years, getting together, spending 12 months, and you've ticked quite a lot of those boxes, like the John Peel sessions. You got 3, which was very impressive. And then that first album, and, things feel like you're progressing, which is important. And often, there's a lot of touring, and that kind of wears a band down quite a bit. And then the sort of tricky second album, though it's a cliche, by then everyone's just really tired and a bit fed up and things. I suppose people haven't really sat down and had a proper conversation and said, look, what's really happening? Can we try and do the next level, rather than we're slightly sort of just pissing each other off now, aren't we? So I just wondered.
Yeah, well, it's just an interesting observation, because I think there's one of the sort of catalysts for the Folk Devils breaking up in the first incarnation of the Folk Devils in the spring of '86 was an interview with, what's his name? Is it Ian Taylor? It was in the NME. And he really took us to pieces.
Was it Neil Taylor?
Sorry?
Was it
Neil Taylor? That's right. Yeah, it was Neil Taylor. And he really, he laid into us something rotten, but it was almost a piece that could have been written about any band at the kind of level we were operating at, which is like, there's not a lot of, if you like, material reward for what we're doing. And we're also at a stage where you're growing up surprisingly quickly. You move from, Mark was still in his teens when the Folk Devils formed. He was a father by the time the Folk Devils folded. And I think if you going from, say, early 20s to late 20s, there's a shift that happens, I think, almost naturally. I think that you cognitively, I think you change. Or if you don't, you end up being stuck as a bit of a cartoon. And, for me, that was almost kind of, you just kind of want to move on a little bit and kind of do a bit of other stuff. So I think there's a kind of
yes
thing that happens there.
So was this interview and feature in the NME? What did it do to the band?
I think it set us against each other. I mean, you know, we didn't help our cause. Neil Taylor was very late when he turned up. Ian was very drunk and quite aggressive towards him. And there was a lot of tension between that Neil picked up on in the room. I mean, some members of the band still haven't forgiven him for writing it. I've been thinking, well, he's a journalist. What do you expect? His job is to write a story. It isn't to tell, you know, it's his story. And it's almost like he was looking for a band to highlight the kind of slightly ludicrous nature of being in a band, if you like, at that time, and especially at that level where you're not really kind of making money. So, I mean, it depends on who you speak to in the Folk Devils. I mean, you know, I just kind of thought it's water under the bridge. But I know somebody posted a sort of scan of the interview on Facebook or something maybe a year ago, and not mentioning any names, but I mean certainly a former member of the band got pretty upset about it, because it's like a bit of a sore one, because you know we were, you know, and I think from my point of view, I think we just weren't grown up enough to handle it. But that's my own personal kind of view.
Because at that time you had management, though, didn't you? With
yeah, I mean, it took place in our manager's office. Nick Jones, who kind of ran a label called Carbon, which had the Scientists and World Domination Enterprises, and ourselves. And yeah, I mean, it was just, I mean, in the end, it was a mess. You know, I guess, you know, to that extent, I'd say we were pretty authentic because we weren't really sufficiently self-conscious about what we were doing. We were, you know, I think there's an element. I mean, you know, sometimes I think a band can get lucky that, you know, something hits it, but we didn't really have any great strokes of luck apart from the fact that John Peel picked up on us. That was our big kind of, you know,
yes, I know.
But we weren't really smart enough or cold-blooded enough to really take that opportunity.
I know. But you were signed, or you released on Situation 2 Records.
Well, that was the Mark II version, and that was really, and that sort of led into the King Blank project and stuff, where Ian had this relationship with Situation 2, Beggar's Banquet, and then there was the Mark II Devils that released sort of one EP, and that's John, the current drummer, and Nick, who'd worked with Ian before. So it was a tangled web being woven. And again, I've spoken with John about this, and I think one of the problems with the second incarnation, he told me a story of a guy who travelled a long way to see one of their first gigs, and he asked if they were going to be playing any of his favourite songs, which were songs he knew from the first lineup. And Ian had turned it into a kind of ground zero thing, and there was no oldies in there at all. And I think John says, in retrospect, there might have been a bit of a mistake, because what you want to do is really build up a legacy under for want of a better word, a brand name. But I mean, Ian wasn't really into that. Each project had its own particular identity, and the Folk Devils, when they reformed, were nothing really like the first Folk Devils. It was not just a different lineup, it was a different thing musically going on. It was much more, I mean, just as fiery, I would say, but much more of a sort of genuinely post-punk kind of sound. Possibly.
So going back to your Mark I the Mark One version, there was you, Alan, Mark, and Ian.
That's right.
Did you have a moment in then '86 where it was like that? There was kind of a moment, and Mark One finished, and then Mark Two started.
Yeah, where basically we'd had a very we went to Holland. We played some great shows, but we had a really disappointing recording session, which kind of used up what remaining money we had, and we came back and it was a bit lackluster. We made the mistake of getting our then sound engineer Mickey, who was a really, really great live sound engineer. He was he knew what to do when you were playing in front of an audience in a hall. And we thought, let's do this and take him to the studio that we had in the north of Holland, the bleak north of Holland in winter. And it just didn't happen, really. It was all a bit lackluster. And again, maybe a lack of maturity. Not at an individual level, is perhaps we didn't really quite know what we were doing sufficiently. We had some great songs that It Drags On, which we've done for the Peel session, which we still play live now. But we thought that would be the kind of, if you like, the feature track from the session. But we got the version that came out on the complete recorded works just lacks a certain something, and we never felt able to really put it out. And from then, if you've got nothing to kind of punt, and the tensions just started to go, I think we probably were able to admit to ourselves it was going nowhere at that point.
Yeah. So did you have a moment?
It wasn't particularly sort of traumatic. I think we just agreed to disagree.
Yes.
And move on. And
so who moved? I know, obviously, Ian stayed. Who moved on then?
I think Ian was key. Ian in all the time I knew him was always making music. He was always going to be doing that. I think I'd reached a stage where I was getting a bit fed up of leading the kind of lifestyle that we'd been leading, and I kind of I'd really lost the kind of desire to do it, the need to do it, which I think you need, especially if you're not making real money out of it. Alan was always kind of doing his thing, but it just kind of, the time had passed for us. I think we'd kind of missed the opportunities. There's a kind of, if you like, it's a bittersweet thing. I think certain bands, there's a moment that they've got to seize, or else the time passes. Because we're talking about, fundamentally a music that has to be, 20 or 30 years on, you listen back. But at the time, that scene was all about being contemporary. It was about being now. And there was a real sense of you do the right thing at the right time, and you'll get an audience. But if you don't, if you don't get the audience that was there for you, they'll move on to something else. And I don't think we didn't really get it together. So I don't know if it sounds like a sort of, I didn't regret it at the time. I was just kind of, it was a thing to move on. I think I probably learned more from being in Folk Devils about kind of personal relationships, especially working relationships. That stood me in good stead in everything else I did after that. But Ian wasn't going to stop anytime soon. I just needed a break. I'd had some health problems, lifestyle-related health problems, but I decided I just wanted to actually feel okay when I woke up in the morning, rather than nothing actually as dramatic or as glamorous as it might be implied. I just had, I was eating bad food, drinking too much, and all the rest of it. And I just wanted to kind of make myself well. So getting out of playing in bands was a good thing. Of course, I went back to play with Ian back in '88 after the Folk Devils Mark II folded. I'm not sure what the story was there. It was a relatively short-lived kind of episode, The Folk Devils Mark II. And I actually went to see them, and I loved them, actually. I was quite surprised that I went fully expecting to loathe them.
Yes, right.
But actually, I was really impressed. I really liked what they were doing. And there was still an element, I really loved what Ian was about. I kind of, latched onto that. But I don't know what, and then I think he still had the deal with Situation 2 Beggars, and he had the King Blank, and I think they were really interested in him as a solo artist. So he came up with the King Blank name, and formed a band to make an album. He'd done a couple of tracks with the Screaming Blue Messiahs, produced by Bill Carter from the Screaming Blue Messiahs, which is the first single. And then, who were a big deal at the time. I mean, the first lineup of Folk Devils supported the Messiahs, sort of, I think, was it University of London Union, somewhere like that. And you've put a band together, you got the money to go and do an album. And that was, ironically, I think I probably enjoyed that experience of working with Ian, the King Blank experience, as much as anything, making that album. And I thought it was a really great band that we kind of cobbled together. Again, I thought this could really go somewhere. Ian's writing was really, really strong at that point. But the record company didn't really want to get behind the band. They wanted Ian, so they kind of fizzled out. And again, I had a big falling out with Ian when we came up to record sort of what became the follow-up. And rekindled a friendship with him later on. But that was if you like, the last serious attempt to work with him.
Yes. So was that was all around the early 90s, wasn't it?
No, I think the King Blank album was 88. And I think we'd started recording stuff that ended up on the second album, the King Blank 2 Ian Lowery group record. I'm on 2 tracks on that, and I think on one of them I mixed down so low you wouldn't know I'm there.
Yeah.
But it was precisely at that point where Ian and I had a falling out, actually. But I won't, no point in talking about it, really.
It would be too bad. But yes, but that was kind of the moment, that session was the last time you kind of recorded with him, and that was the late 80s.
I mean, we rekindled our friendship, actually. He moved up to Scotland. I moved up to Scotland in 91 to complete my education. I went to do a degree in Stirling and lived in Stirling. And by 93, I'm guessing, he perhaps, 90, maybe even 97, certainly 93, he was staying in Leith in Edinburgh. And we'd sort of been in touch. We became really good friends. We went out drinking, and Ian certainly knew the pubs of Edinburgh surprisingly well for somebody who'd not really spent that much time there. And got very fond memories of my time when, I'm still here, but hanging out with Ian, because it was nice. It kind of, left our friendship intact. Because one of the things about being in a band is there are times when the relationships are so intense that you forget that you're friends.
Yes, tricky.
And there's a kind of poison that creeps into them, and it's just nice to have that relationship. So, that's kind of, if you like, a bit about my relationship with Ian. I don't know what that says about the music. But.
Yeah, but did you? I mean, for that decade, and then the next one, until you sort of get back into the Folk Devils. Did you? Was the guitar put to one side, and you just went, right, I'm just going to get on with the rest of it?
For a while, when I committed to studying, I mean, I always hung on to my black Stratocaster, and occasionally it would be wheeled out at maybe a jam session or whatever. But almost I kind of really just put music to one side until late. I concentrated on my studies, and then I did a doctorate, so that took up plenty of brain space. And I mean, there was the odd thing where there was a few old friends. There was a band. Actually, during the summer, I came down to visit my mum, brought my guitar down, and we did some music, even did some gigs. There was a band with a guy called Pete Lewis. He used to follow the Folk Devils about, called Fast Babies was my favourite name of his. And we did a couple of gigs and a couple of sessions. And again, I was attracted to working with him because he was a good writer. He wrote interesting lyrics and songs. But since the turn of the millennium, this midlife crisis of sorts, I've played music fairly constantly since then. I played, went through a couple of convoluted things, but playing in a band called Dave's New Bike, which is a kind of folk rock, is maybe the closest generic thing, but obviously I'm adding the kind of rock element, but it's song based. Again, it's about the songs. So again, we've actually made a couple of albums, got some airplay and that kind of stuff. So working at a decent level where the quality is reasonable enough to get airplay. Even Six Music, Mark Whiteley professed himself to played one of our things on his show. So I've kept going.
Did he produce one of the John Peel sessions?
He did, yeah, he did. And what was quite touching is when the reissues came out, he played Where the Buffalo Roam the week it came out. And he actually sort of, if you like, recanted, if you like, what he described as the sad story behind the Folk Devils, but he really he spoke with great fondness. So I think it was the first one he produced, it was quite interesting. So he seems to notice, thankfully, whenever if my name's attached to something, at least he plays it.
Yes, it's good. So coming up to this strange year. Well, the last 5 years, obviously, the Folk Devils sort of appeared again, didn't they?
Yeah, you can blame the internet for that, really. Well, it's this strange phenomenon, really, of social media enabling people to get in touch.
So had it been the case that you'd had several decades with very little contact, apart from having to say, oh, geez?
Almost none, really, I would say.
Did you?
I think I probably had a little bit of contact with Mark through that. Again, Mark and I had a falling out. I won't go into the detail. But it was kind of, lifestyle related, shall we say. And we kind of just all drifted off into different worlds. Surprisingly, the last refuge of the Folk Devils seems to be academia, because both Mark and I ended up taking our studies to a kind of, beyond first degree level.
How did the band, just briefly, how did the band kind of have that moment where you heard that Ian had died? I mean, because that must have been like one amazing shock.
Well, it took a lot of time for a few people. I heard more or less the day or the day after. I can remember it really, really vividly. And I was a late adopter of mobile phones, but I had my wee Nokia. And I was actually on holiday with my family in North Wales, I think. And my phone went, and it was Courtney, who was Ian's ex from the time of the Folk Devils. And she rang me up to tell me that he'd died, which was a real shock. I mean, conveniently, however, I'd spoken with Ian maybe 2 or 3 months previously, just after I completed my doctorate, and he rang up and we had a long warm conversation, and everything was kind of right with the world. It was just interesting that he chose to just call me up, and we had a long chat. And we, arranged to, we'll see each other. I'll be down south anyway. Got this horrible news, but convenient enough for me, I was down south or close enough to the south, and we just decided, well, we'll go and stay at my mum's. She lives in High Wycombe, and we'll go to the funeral. And I'm really, really glad I did, because it was the greatest party Ian was very social. He didn't, his place was the pub, and the Churchill is kind of the Folk Devils local on Kensington Church Street, was full of folk. The church where the funeral took place, where the service took place, was mobbed. It was actually surprisingly, I was stunned at the numbers. The church was full. And yeah, it was, as far as, I'm not sure. I think, Mark was there. That was the first time I'd seen Mark in a long time. Nigel Pulsford, who went on to bigger and better things with Bush, but who played in King Blank, was there. Hugh, who was also in that band, and quite a few people. I don't think we don't know what happened to Al. Every so often there's news of Al from somewhere, and we don't really know what happened to Al. We think he's living somewhere down in the West Country, but we're not sure. But sadly for Nick, I think Nick had moved to America by 2001. I think maybe 1990 moved to America. He was working for a record company in New York, I think, if I get my facts right. And he didn't hear that Ian had died until about a decade afterwards. And it obviously hit him really hard, because he'd worked really, really closely. He went back a long way with Ian, but he's over in America. And gradually, I think the if you like, the impetus for doing something really started with David Lowry, Ian's older brother. A big influence on his musical taste, because Ian always had a real love for a bit of blues rock, from the sort of late 60s and early 70s. But I think David really hadn't appreciated Ian's work almost until he died, and I think he wanted to honour the legacy. And I think there was a move there to put out stuff to honour it. So I think, and with Nick's, if you like, know-how, as a sort of, if you like, somebody who knew the record industry, the music industry, he was able to start doing that. And so the first real signs of that was the Peel sessions coming out with the Folk Devils Mark II EP, and then the Peel sessions coming out as a sort of digital only package. And then that would have been, was that 2013? By then, we'd all kind of hooked up and got in touch via Facebook and stuff like that. That kind of, and there was a bit of half-hearted chat about maybe playing together again, which we kind of laughed out of court. Especially without Ian being there. And then 2015 was the Optic Nerve reissue package of all the recorded stuff, the double vinyl, CD, a proper release. And as that was being kind of put together in the early part of 2015, I just thought, well, we were a live band. I mean, if nothing else, it would be really nice to play some of these songs live and do a show. And the original idea was really to do one. But it's a bit like that Al Pacino in Godfather 3, I tried to get it back out. Well, they pulled me back in. We did one show, and the whole setup was convoluted. We didn't really know what we were letting ourselves in for. But John and Nick from the Mark II, Mark and myself from the Mark I, and I thought, yeah, let's see how this goes. And we were a bit concerned, obviously, about the vocals, and we were getting to the point of shit. We're not going to do it. We actually set a date of when we were going to do it, because there was an opportunity that I could fit in around about the time of the release in September of that year, and I had a few days off where I could come down from London. And we thought, are we going to do it? And then it just happened that somebody suggested Dave Hodgson, Norm, as he's nicknamed, who we'd met before and knew Ian from way back when, but was also from the Northeast. And he came along to one of the rehearsals that we had in the summer, and we took it seriously. It wasn't just turn up and play the songs. We actually spent quite a lot of time that summer rehearsing and seeing if it worked. But we were all kind of itching to play, really, I think. I mean, I've been playing fairly regularly with this band, Dave's New Bike, so my chops were in fairly good shape. Mark had really kind of got himself together, was in a good place physically, mentally, and the rest of it. And there was a kind of really quite nice, warm coming together of people that we knew. And at the time, initially, it was just John, Mark, and myself, because Nick, although it was a bit of a schlep from Scotland, Nick was living in the States. But we kind of started rehearsing the set, and we had a couple of sessions during the summer and left it for a bit. And then once we thought, yeah, Dave, we weren't knocked out straight away, but what he had the real willingness to do the work and really learn the songs and think about what he was doing, rather than just, be some bloke in front of a band. And by the time we were thinking, actually, this could work. And then we set up, if you like, Nick had been kind of playing along with all the stuff. I mean, essentially the first gig was just all the old stuff anyway. So all you need to do is kind of get the records out and relearn the parts. And Nick came over, we did the rehearsal, and then we did this show in... is it Dalston somewhere? The waiting room. One of the worst load-ins, I can remember that. We had a shit ton of gear, and it was one of the worst load-ins ever. But it was quite a big event. My wife and my eldest son, who really likes the Folk Devils, that's his kind of thing anyway, that kind of edgy sound, came down from Scotland. And my wife said possibly the most telling thing. We did okay, actually. We had to turn people away because it was such a limited space. But, people, and we did, but she said, you know why it was fairly quiet, the reaction of the first few songs? I said, no, why? I said, because people were surprised that you weren't shit. And it kind of, and we felt we acquitted ourselves more than well. And actually, even before we'd done that, we'd had an offer of another gig later that year with the Membranes up in Preston at the Continental, Preston with the Wolfhounds and the Membranes. And to be frank, that one, the rehearsal was the sound check. We insisted, well, we'll do it as long as we get a really, really long sound check so we could get the songs kind of fired up. But, I mean, we're not talking, it's not prog, it's not particularly complicated. And if, and we've got a lot of faith in our rhythm section, if you like, to hold it all together. And it was just a huge amount of fun. But we also felt, actually, this is pretty good. We really thought, I mean, a bit like my wife, wow, it's not shit. And You know, because if it had been, we would have done one gig, had a drink, and that would have been see you later. But there was a kind of, if you like, the fire was rekindled. Dave's a very creative kind of input member, and the chemistry worked. In some ways, it might have worked differently. If Ian had been there and there was, you know, Nick and myself, it would have worked differently. But, you know, in some ways, Nick and I formed a much more of a collaborative relationship. And I've always liked the sort of that twin guitar sound. I just love the MC5, and I thought, well, this is the closest I'm going to get to that sort of thing. And so we start, and Mark was the one really insisting on us being a living entity. If we're going to play, then we have to do original material. So after those initial 2 gigs, Nick lined up, I think, half a dozen dates for the following summer with the Inca Babies. And rehearsing for that, we worked up Forever, which is the first. And since then, we've started trying to kind of introduce some, you know, to become a living band, because you've got to kind of play new stuff, really, I think, and write. But, you know, I think we're all kind of, you know, it's what, you know, I think the set when we play live, which obviously, that's, you know, we were really disappointed. We had some shows lined up in June and October, which are all bit in the dust. But you know, there's, you know, plenty of stuff that's kind of familiar to anybody, you know, for those few people who really liked us anyway. But I think, you know, we're all pretty kind of interesting, creative people in our own way. And I think actually if you put 5 people in a room together with a desire, and again, it's probably a slightly more grown-up attitude than we had when we were all in our 20s and full of, you know, beer and whatever else.
Yes. So look, because Optic Nerve, obviously that's great to get, you know, a label, you know, interested, and they're such a brilliant label, or he is, from Preston.
Well, I think it helped that Ian had some Folk Devils records actually in his collection anyway.
Right. So he was able to, yes, work on them. But then you've got this EP coming out as well in the autumn, haven't you? Is it the autumn?
Yeah, in September.
In September. So that's kind of new recordings with one old favourite and then 2.
But a new recording of the old favourite. I suppose part of that was when we got into the studio. No, we'd wanted to do it. You know, we'd wanted to write stuff, do something new, and you know, I think. In some ways, ironic. I mean, it's not, you know, obviously not for the money, but I think we kind of all need to do this. There's a need to do it, and if you're going to do it, we were never a nostalgia act. We were never really the soundtrack to anybody's good time. You know, that's not what we were about. We were, you know, malcontents. Really, that was our shtick.
Yeah.
And there's still an element of channeling that anger and fury and trying to do something creative with it. But at the same time, I think there's much less anger being directed at other members of the band than there used to be. Let's put it that way.
Do you feel because there's like the passing of time, you've probably got 35 years, haven't you, from those? Well,
yeah,
probably a bit early. Do you feel that because there's kind of a lot of people I've interviewed from that period, and you know, everyone's slightly different, but there is a few patterns where someone's done that musical kind of moment and then had to get their life together, and you know, had a few little, you know, other kind of bands, but nothing that serious, and then have got to that point where playing music again and sort of going back and sort of rediscovering that album or those songs that you played and that band, you know, and some of the mates that you had at that time, plus then thinking, well, actually I quite like playing live, it's good fun, I'm not going to give my day job up, and then recording a new EP is just another nice challenge. And I just kind of feeling that perhaps it's to do with, I don't know, if you were trying to do that like 10 years after breaking up, it would have felt like, oh, you're trying to relive your youth. Whereas now it has that feeling of like, actually, you just want to do it because you're at an age where if you don't do it now, 10 years time, you're going to be all in your 70s and it's going to probably be too late. So you might as well crack on and do it and not really worry about what anybody says. And apart from your wife, obviously.
Yeah, there's a bit of a debate, I guess, within the band about age and the use of the term old and stuff. But in some ways, I think you don't have any choice. You ain't going to defeat it. You're getting older, so you might as well almost embrace it. But I think there's an element in that if you can't do it, then in the moment really for the Folk Devils was. When the reissue, the optic nerve reissue package came out, there was going to be no point in trying to get back together after that. If we put those out and left it for 2 years, then there's no point. But there was a genuine reason to kind of, all right, let's celebrate what we did back then and see what happens really. And in many ways, that attitude of playing live and just seeing what happens was the spirit of, if you like, the late 70s and early 80s to me, that people took chances. It didn't have to be perfect. Now you go and see a band just starting out and everything's kind of pretty fucking slick. And it's not really the kind of, the culture's maybe moved on as well. But I think that idea of just doing it for the sake of doing it, I mean, it's the heart of creativity, really. It's that it's not, creativity that's done for a purpose isn't really creativity. You'll excuse me at the moment, I'm reading a lot of Krishnamurti and he talks about stuff like this. And it's just kind of made me think that, if you're going to be creative, it's not, I mean, it's good to be, if you like, if you've got something you've got to do anyway, like, paint the fence or whatever, you might as well be creative while you're doing it. But sometimes you just got to be creative because you want to be creative. And if you can find a format that works for you, and, there's still something, I pick up a guitar every day. It's sometimes just for a cuddle. But it's still something that's a kind of, and sometimes something exciting happens when I play the guitar and it's like, oh, what's that? And you kind of get, where's the record button on my phone and all this kind of stuff. So I think there's an element of that with the Folk Devils, and I think there's a sense with us that we actually think we're pretty good. I mean, it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but in terms of what we do and the reactions we've had from shows, I think have borne that out. We've held our audiences; they haven't kind of just wandered off. It's almost like kind of wow, what we do, and in some ways we're probably better than we were back in the day, because I think we've probably become better musicians.
Yeah.
And a little bit less bothered about annoying everybody that we come into contact with. We get on well with sound engineers now. Well, by the odd, if Mark's listening to this, by the odd exception.
Yes, because it's interesting, because if you hadn't had this last 5 years, the archive and the legacy of the Folk Devils would have probably slightly sort of drifted, sort of gone.
Yeah, it would have died out with the people that came to see us,
Yeah, I mean, having the reissues, I must admit there's a few labels like, Optic Nerve, Cherry Red, Fire Station, Cloudberry, who have all, 3 of those are done by enthusiasts. So Cherry Red's a bit of a different operation, but it's great that they have gone back and sort of archived a lot of stuff and brought it out and put in nice sleeve notes, because I don't think of it totally as a nostalgia thing, because I've gone back and listened to things I missed the first time, thinking, because at the time you can't listen to everything, and also like you said at the very start, buying a record took months of saving up. Buying this thing was like a big gig, and you were going to play every track on that vinyl record for months, even if you hated it, because that was a lot of bloody...
absolutely.
And so a record came along, you could see, advertised, people talking about it, but if you didn't get to hear it, it was gone. We all took a chance and bought a record because of a journalist telling you it was the single of the week or album of the week, and went, it's shit. Thank you for that. But so sometimes, we just miss it, because then, a month later something else comes along. and you miss that band or that album, you know. So I've gone back and gone, blimey, you know, that's quite amazing. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you can there's lots to kind of reappraise and go back to. Yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, obviously it's benefited us, but I think as well, I think it's a bit like, you know, we've done a couple of shows with the Wolfhounds, and they've definitely rediscovered their creative juices. I mean, not that they, if you like, they ever went away, but there's a sense of, it's not just about being a band from, you know, the late 80s or whatever. They're singing songs, and if you like, I think the cultural element, and this is why I think embracing the age thing is a good thing. You know, if you still listen to music to make sense of your world, if you like, then you need music that speaks to your experience now. I mean, you know, whether that's music, you know, whether that's Miles Davis from way back when, or something that came out last week. There's almost an element. There's times when there's stuff I'm not interested in, that kind of music or that, and then you hear something that really sparks something because it just speaks to you, and you don't know whether it's now. I suppose it's actually getting quite difficult to know whether something's ancient or brand new. I mean, I was listening to Gideon Code the other night, and there were a couple of things I thought, that sounds like it's from the 50s and it's brand new, and vice versa.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's a labour of love. I think it's the remnants of that time when if you like, music is, you know, pop music, rock and roll, or whatever, was really at the heart of the culture. I don't think it is anymore. But I think for people who grew up in there, the music still carries a kind of, I don't know, a significance of some sort. They still kind of want that. There's still a hunger for it.
I think there's definitely an importance. You know, there's like something that isn't sort of, it's never been diluted. Because I must admit, I grew up with, yes, kind of quite a few friends who are older than me. I suppose they were part of that hippie generation, and they definitely stopped listening to new music in the 80s. You know, they'd got up to, you know, Van Morrison, Bob Dylan, Grateful Dead, Jackson Browne, you know, all that. And then something happened, and I thought, God, is the same thing going to happen to me when I get older? But I'm still curious, but I don't know where to find new music. But I must admit, I still have that. I really would love to hear something that I haven't heard before that makes me think, wow, I must go and play that endlessly for a couple of weeks. You know? And I do, and I suppose, you know, like I didn't come across a band called The Sound at the time, but then I've heard them now recently and thought, God, yeah, they're from the 80s. But it's like it has that.
Still got the vinyl, I have.
And I kind of hear that track called Winning, which I missed completely. Check me out and call me a music fan. And I think, God, that's genius. Yeah, that guy is genius. You know, I mean, and you know, you think, yeah, I love that feeling of still being that excited about something, even though it's really old. Never mind.
Yeah, no, I think it's life enhancing stuff. I mean, I never thought I'd say that about the Folk Devils, but I said it in another interview, that actually the whole process of getting back together for the Folk Devils, and we were a kind of miserable bunch, really. You know, we weren't. I mean, there was a humour there, but it was a very dark humour. It's sort of strangely kind of life enhancing process to go through. You feel kind of like an element of spiritual growth or something through doing it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been quite a nice. It's been. You know, it makes sense of something. I'm not entirely sure what. So obviously not enough. It doesn't make enough sense. But it certainly it fulfills a need. I think in the end, any kind of artistic, creative endeavour, there's a need to do it.
It certainly shaped your adult life, didn't it? Let's face it.
Yeah, and I mean, I've always, and I guess, I mean, not playing in bands didn't mean I stopped listening to music, but I think there's something about when you play, you listen with. For me, I listen with much more sort of critical intensity especially if I hear things that really speak to me, I go, how did they do it? What is that they're doing there? How do I get? How would I do that if I was trying to do something like that? Or sometimes it's just even just a melody line or a guitar line or whatever. But I guess for me the thing about going back is a slightly different age group. So my big obsession lately has been Mick Ronson, famous for doing all the stuff with Bowie and Hunter. But I just thought, I thought I'd explore his career. He had an astonishing career, even though he died in about 93, 94.
Yes, that was around that time, wasn't it?
And again, maybe a bit too sort of classic mainstream rock, but it's all out there now. All that stuff's been reissued, and you can track stuff down, and if you like, create a narrative out of it.
Well, I suppose Bowie said, he said that Mick Ronson was his Jeff Beck, didn't he? That was one of his favourite lines. Bowie always wanted a really good lead guitarist, and Mick Ronson was that person. And then people like L. Slick and Reed Staples.
He's had amazing people. Anything you want to ask me about the Folk Devils at all? Rather than Mick Ronson.
No, yeah. So just lastly, what would you say then if you could have said something to your 18-year-old self starting out, in those early years?
Would the 18-year-old self, or indeed the 22-year-old self, even have bothered listening?
Probably not.
I think probably take yourself less seriously, but take the music a bit more seriously. It's like work harder at the music, but don't get hung up on the persona kind of thing. You actually relax and be kind, really. I think the Folk Devils, probably a bit of kindness would have gone a long way back in the day, but those were strange kind of times. I don't know whether that sort of covers it, but I think there's an element of, if I was speaking to anybody who wanted to play, kind of, a loud, raucous, noisy sort of band of troublemakers like we were, I think it's work harder at the music. Don't be too easily convinced of your own greatness, if you like. I think there's that horrible thing when you're young that you substitute the kind of cockiness for the confidence that comes from knowing you're really good. And actually you become really good by working harder at it. I think not in a kind of 9 to 5 way, but actually just taking those moments where you get the opportunity to be creative, take them a bit more seriously. Don't have the 7th beer or whatever. Pay attention, because that time flashes by you, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think that would probably be
That would be it. That would be good. Well, look, this has been. Well, thank you ever so much for giving me this the time for this interview. This has been brilliant.
It's been a pleasure. I don't know whether it's of any use, but
God, it's fantastic, and it's always good to hear. And it's great that the band, you've got this new project. Well, not the project, but the EP, and hopefully, God knows, you can get to play live again soon.
Yeah, well, I think ironically, we had actually been sort of firing sketches of ideas across the internet prior to what we anticipated was a get together in June, which obviously involves a few days rehearsals, and because we probably know the old stuff well enough, so there's a chance to work on working 1 or 2 more new songs into a set and the rest of it. But sadly, the fact that because we live so far apart from each other. I mean, there's 3 that live in London, but I'm in Scotland and Nick's in New Jersey. It makes it really, really difficult. And there's still something, you can fire ideas digitally, if you like, but there's still something about being in a room with someone when they play. It could be an offhand riff or something. You just think, what's that? So with a bit of luck, we'll keep taking the vitamins and keep our weight down and wear face masks and, hopefully reconvene at some time.
Yes, it would be magic, wouldn't it?
In the not too distant future, and hopefully come out playing Norwich or something.
Yeah, I know, because I often see you playing with people like the Inca Babies and Harry and the Membranes and the I don't know if you play with the cravats, but you.
Yeah, we did a great bunch of shows with the cravats. That was a great time.
Yeah.
Maybe is that 2 years ago? We did some show. I think we've done two batches of shows with the cravats, and they're great. We got on really, really well with them. There wasn't any again. It was just like a bunch of grown-ups getting together. I can remember sound checks when you're younger, and everybody's strutting about trying to put other people off, and blow up their gear and stuff like that. And everybody just got on like a house on fire. So, and the Cravats are great as well. I was really impressed by them as a live band. They're great.
Shend, is it the Shend?
Yeah. Keeps a fairly high-profile presence online.
Yes.
Bit of the surrealist, Dadaist humour.
The very things. They were great. But
Let's
look,
check it out. Actually.
This has been great. Well, thank you, Chris. I better let you get on. But thanks for this, and I'll keep in touch. But all the best for the year.
Okay. When do you think whatever you do with this will be going out?
Probably in 2 or 3 weeks' time.
All right. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let us know. But I'll I don't know whether I've already put a like on your page. I presume you've got a Facebook.
Yes, but I'll check that out. Actually, I'll make a note. Yes, Facebook.
Yeah, but I'll keep a weather eye out. And Nick's really good at alerting people to what's going on.
Oh, good. I'm probably friends.
He's the real anchor of the band. He's the one that keeps things ticking over. So.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, look. Thanks ever so much, and
all right.
I'll keep in touch. But all the best for the year.
Great. Thanks,
Take
David.
Bye. Hello. Well, not hello. Goodbye, really. That is the end of the interview. Well done if you got to the end. You deserve a medal. But anyway, look, I always love that last bit because it always is so fudgy. And slightly embarrassing, but I embrace that side of it. A big thank you to Chris from the Folk Devils for giving me the time for that interview. That's it. This is David Eastaugh, the C86 Show. If you want to contact me for some random reason, you can. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, do C86 Show. Also, these have all been archived. You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Check them out. If you're struggling sleeping, I'm sure they'll send you right to Zland. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.